Welcome back to the Mustache channel, and I hope you're all doing well. Okay, but in all seriousness, this is a really important video for me. I have been thinking and working on this for over a year at this point, and it requires a little bit of backstory. So if you're new here, even within the last year, I used to live stream edits on this channel when I lived in a house. And if you're also new here, I live full-time in a 4Runner, traveling around, taking landscape photos and making editing videos, talking about travel and hoping to help raise awareness for mental health. Now, it's obvious I'm not currently in the 4Runner, thank goodness, because that means I can make this video. So anyways, I used to live in a house and I used to make a lot of editing videos, and a lot of the times I would take my photos and edit them live on air and people would just come in and chat. But what that really taught me was I really learned what a lot of people struggle with when it comes to editing. The biggest struggle with editing is that it's not linear. It's not just something that you can do step 1, step 2, step 3 and be done. It's a puzzle. There is no correct way to start and end it. There is no guide that says you should do these things first, middle, and last. I really say that it's kind of like a dance. Editing is like a dance where you kind of have like this back and forth, and it's about a flow, and it's not necessarily about setting one setting and then never coming back to it. So I've really been thinking about my workflow and how I implement a lot of that stuff into every edit that I do. And over the last year, I've taken so many photos. You guys have watched me take so many photos on this channel, living on the road. And I started to notice all of these patterns that I have, and I noticed that I was working in a workflow. And maybe sometimes that was a bit stagnant, but the majority of the time, my style and the way that I edit had a lot of steps. And I started to note those down and really think about them. In the last couple weeks, I've spent a lot of time coming up with what I think is as close to a step-by-step process that you could do with editing. Okay, so the way it works is that you actually will end up downloading a preset pack, but it's not presets like you're used to. These don't just do something to your image when you click them and then you're done. What it's actually doing is there to guide you through your edit. It's almost like I'm trying to manipulate Lightroom and do telling or teaching you how to edit rather than just providing the tools. So some of these presets don't actually do anything. They're just text there to remind you. But where all the meat is and where all the information is in my companion article that goes with this preset pack. The idea is that you use the preset pack, which is located on the left side of Lightroom Classic, and you follow through these different steps. And some of those steps ask you questions, and some of them apply settings to your image, and some of them might apply different big effects to your image, like adding sunlight to your image or helping you with your haze in your image. Things like that. And every step of the way has a companion article or something that explains exactly what it's doing so you can better understand different steps of editing. And at the end of the day, my whole goal here is no matter what your skill level is, it's that you can sit down and learn a fluid workflow for editing, and you can build stronger principles for your editing. So even if you're an advanced editor, this might be something that would help you really hone in on knowing how to approach any edit. I think that's the most difficult thing in editing is knowing what your image needs. And we kind of address a lot of that within these companion articles. But then once you've learned those questions and you've learned how to figure those things out, you don't have to reference the companion as much. Let's take white balance, for example. So if you look at the panel in Lightroom, in the preset pack, there is a white balance and color profile setting. All it's gonna do is set your white balance to auto and set your color profile to Adobe Landscape, which is a profile that I use most of the time. And then if you go to the companion article, it'll explain exactly what that setting is doing. And if you don't know how to pick your white balance, I have my entire video on white balance there for landscape photography. Okay, so I don't want to just tell you about this either. I want to show it to you, but I thought it would be really fun to take some of your images and edit them just like I used to do in my live streams. I also thought this would be the most genuine because you're going to see me see these photos for the first time. So for transparency's sake, I've seen the photos, but I haven't edited them, I haven't touched them, and I'm going to look at the images and go through my step-by-step workflow using my editing companion and edit these images just like I would in my own work. I also think this is really cool because it also shows different cameras. So instead of seeing only images from either my drone or my Canon cameras, you get to see some from different styles of cameras. So I've got 4 images from people that have submitted back all the way back in March. Sorry, I never got around to using those images, and a few from the last couple weeks. Anyways, let's jump into Lightroom. We're gonna edit some images using this workflow, and I think you can actually learn a lot regardless if you're interested in this editing companion or not. So let's get it in. Okay, so for all the images, you're going to notice at the top corner their Instagram handles or their name, depending on which one they gave me. This one is from Ken. We also got one from Levi, one from Tim, and one from JB. Most of these people are my Patreon supporters or long-standing supporters of this channel. Let's jump into the Develop tab and start editing this image. Now, the first thing that you're going to see is on the left-hand side where it says Find Direction. It says No Editing. However, some of these, when you hover over them, they do things. So if I go into my companion article here and I scroll down to What's the Mood, anything in the bolded text is going to tell you exactly what that preset is doing, even if you're not intended to use the preset. And the idea here is if you need reference for trying to figure out how to edit your image, finding direction in your image, I have 5 different sections here about maybe what's missing, what's not important, and I go over details in that in this companion article. But again, once you learn that and you have an idea, it's always there to reference, but you might not necessarily have to leave Lightroom for this section. And that's what the entire first section is for. So for example, if you hover over how important is color, it just turns your image to black and white to kind of give you an idea or get your juices flowing about how important color might be in an image. Particularly in this image, I think color is very important because I absolutely love the way the color is on these trees here. Super gorgeous. I'm actually really excited to edit this image. Overall, this is a great image to start off with, and I'm really, really happy with this. Glad, thank you for submitting this, Ken. Okay, so that entire first section is just trying to understand and answer questions about finding direction for your edit. The next section is about your initial adjustments, a lot of the stuff that I do to almost every image. So let's just go through it really quick. So check shadows and highlights. This is just checking to see how much data is in the image. For example, I have no idea if I'm going to be able to recover these highlights. And it looks like when I go to check highlights, I can recover almost everything. There might be just a little bit. It looks like it pretty much got everything except this little bit right here. So that's really nice to know. The next thing is going to be a spot removal. Now, I didn't take this image, so I don't know if I need to go into spot removal, but let's just go to visualize spots. I don't really see anything in the sky that I'm too worried about, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. You'll also notice on the left-hand side through all the presets, anything with a star is not meant to be something you click on and use it for your edit. That's why in the spot removal, I can't have a preset that tells your image where all the spots are, but that should just give you an idea. All right, so the first actual setting we're going to use is the white balance and profile. All this is going to do is set my color profile to Adobe Landscape and set my white balance. Now, just like I was saying before, if you don't know about white balance, you can come in here to the companion. You can tell exactly what this preset is doing, and then you can watch this video that explains what white balance is at depth. I think this is really important, and it's one of those things that even if I try to write a full article on it, it would take up this entire page. White balance is very specific, and it's very difficult to have a correct white balance. At the end of the day, it's really up to you in terms of your artistic choice. For me, we're going to go off of auto, but I do like how it warmed up the image a lot. And I think that is something we're going to do. And something along these lines. And remember, editing is a dance, so we will come back to this setting very likely. The next setting is my calibration in HSL fix. All this is doing is adding some blue calibration and fixing it in HSL. That's looking pretty good. We can probably even bump it up a little bit more. And I'm really liking the way that looks. The next thing is going to be the tone curve. This is just going to add some contrast to your image. And like I said, you can always reference the companion here. It'll tell you exactly what's going on and exactly what it's doing and why. What's really nice about some of these adjustments is they have a mount slider. So I'm just going to, I don't want that much. So what's really cool is if you can actually visualize what's happening right here on the tone curve. So if I went to a lot, it'll do that. And if I went to less, it'll do that, all automatically using that preset. So I think about 50, maybe 60 is good. The next setting is the histogram adjustments, and it is going to apply, let me undo this. It is going to apply a bunch of different settings to your exposure, highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks. But reality is this entire setting is here so that you can pay attention to your histogram and maybe recover the areas of the image that need to be recovered. So I'm actually going to click on it because it did a pretty good job. Let's bring down the exposure a bit, and actually let's bring down the highlights even more. And that's really looking pretty good. And the next thing is the pre-crop. I'm not going to sit here and tell you about crop. We would spend way too much time trying to do that. But I have 2 sections of crop in here because some images you know that when you take them, you're going to need to crop them before you ever start editing them. Other images might need a crop at the end. In my experience, I tend to crop more at the end, but there's 2 steps in here. I talk about it all in the companion if you want to reference that. Now, look how much we've done to this image so far, just with the initial adjustments. We haven't even really started editing this image, and man, there's just so much here. It looks so good. Okay, now this is the part where there is no linear system. A lot of these tools do different things, and they tell you what they do here, and they go into depth within the companion. So for example, if I went to color grade, that's going to add a little color grade to my image. That's not what I wanted to do to this image, but I'm giving you an example. Something I do want to do to this image is balance the sky. So we're going to go sky balance. It's going to create my mask in here. You're going to see a selected sky and a G&D. That's because a lot of the times I use both to balance my sky. And right now it's definitely adding a bit too much warmth because there's enough warmth already in there. Let's turn this one off first and just kind of see where we're at with this particular sky. And obviously it has some trees in it for this because those trees are so bright that it looks like it's, well, it thinks it's part of the sky, but that's okay. I don't think it's hurting too much if I turn this on and off. I do think it's a little bit too much for this part. So we're going to let it be pretty bright. I kind of like this look. I kind of like how it's bright there and I'm not trying to fight that loss of data. And I like that because it is really bright right there. And I'm not trying to recover it too much. Actually, I don't even think I want to recover it this much. Let's do that. But I like being able to see the clouds. So if I turn this off, it adds just a touch that there are clouds there and that the data is there from the image. And I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so something else I want to do is definitely accentuate this area in the waterfall. So the way I'm going to do that is just use this focus light setting. And all that's going to do is add a nice big radial filter that we probably need to make a little bit smaller for our particular use case here. I'm going to shape it around this waterfall and it's really subtle. Let's warm it up just a little bit as well. And let's bring the whites up a little bit more. And let's turn that on and off. I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, I don't necessarily know how much more this image needs. Let me look at it for a second. Okay, overall, I think maybe we bring down the exposure just a little bit more. Just a little bit more. I think that's pretty good. I'm going to full screen it so I have an idea of what the colors are looking like. Okay, I don't necessarily know if this image needs much more in terms of the actual edit. You could come in here and we could add a little bit of clarity and dehaze, which is where this soft punch setting is. Like I said, some of these are reminders. They're not necessarily, you're going to add exactly 15 dehaze and minus 15 clarity. But it's going to teach you principles and it's going to have you go, what does this do? And how does this work? And why is it doing it? And then you can reference back to the companion article in here. And you can click on things like, what is the sky balance doing? And it'll explain it to you. That's the whole purpose, to teach you a linear workflow that gives you really good principles for editing and just kind of teach you things naturally rather than just, here's exactly how radial filters work. You get to actually see them work in your photos. So one thing I'm noticing is I think the foreground is a little too blue. I mean, it needs to be blue because it's in shadow, but I think it's just a little bit too blue. However, I don't want to warm up the whole image because that's going to make this section too warm. Okay, that's actually not too bad. So let's bring it up just a little bit. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to come in here and do a specific color adjust. So I'm going to click on this mask. It's going to create a specific color adjust mask in here. And then all I'm going to do is come in here and find a blue tone. And then I'm going to hold Option or Alt on the computer and get an idea of how much we actually want, something along these lines. And I'm actually going to reset this entire thing by double clicking Effect. And then all I'm going to do is warm up that section. That's too much. Way too much. Let's just do maybe 12. And then it's also looking a tiny bit green to my eyes, but I'm not entirely sure. So let's do that. And it's very subtle. It's very subtle. You might not even be able to see it on YouTube, but it's warming up those shadows just a little bit, but it's still, everything in shadow is still nice and white or even on a blue tint. And I think that's actually too much. Let's bring it back down. Okay. I think that's looking pretty good. So I think this edit is done. So the final things are, Let's look at the final crop. So I think actually this area on the right-hand side is not doing too much for the image. And I actually think I'm going to crop it so that basically that last tree getting hit by light is the last one we see. And I would like to crop out that building there, but I think it's gonna encroach too much on this section. So I think that that's gonna be close to what our crop is. Maybe something like this to balance that waterfall in the middle of the shot. I don't necessarily know if this is the exact crop I would end up on if I was putting it as my portfolio, but for sake of time in this video, that's pretty good. Okay, so the last steps in here you'll see are balance saturation. A lot of these steps are reminders to figure out maybe your image got too saturated, because a lot of the times when you're adding contrast and you're adding things like Adobe Landscape as the profile and all these other things, you're adding saturation back into the image. So if I click on balance saturation, it's going to remove about 15 saturation from the whole image. And that's probably a bit too much. Let's do -10. Come check my HSL. -15 is probably pretty good. And I think that's good. The next thing is going to be managing white balance. This setting doesn't actually do anything, but when you highlight over it, it's a reminder that, hey, make sure your white balance is where you want it to be, which I think it is. The next thing is external noise reduction, if you're going to need that for your image. I don't need it for this image. And the next setting is going to be sharpening in Lightroom with the settings that I use pretty often, or sharpen externally. Obviously choose what you need. And I also talk about in the companion article what you can use for external sharpening or the settings for internal sharpening, but those are there. And the last step is a reminder to step away from your image, refresh your eyes, step away for 15 minutes, a day, a week, however long you need to be at peace with the edit that you've made to your image. And that's looking pretty good. So that's our first image. Here's the start. Here's the finish. The reality is this is just a solid image and a lot of atmosphere. So it's a pretty easy edit overall. Okay, let's start with the next one. This one is from Levi. Now I'm going to go a little bit quicker through this edit. Otherwise this video is going to get super lengthy. So I'm not going to explain everything about the particular settings over here. I'm just going to go through like I naturally would. Okay, so the first thing I notice about this image is that it's a little too blue. So let's check the data in here. I think it's pretty obvious that we have everything we need. And let's check our spot removal, see if there's any dust. There might be a little spot right there, but I'm not too worried about that. You can always fix that at the end as well. Okay, so that white balance fix did a lot. So like I said, our image was a little bit too blue. I actually think we can come up here and warm it up a little bit more. And yeah, I think that's looking pretty good. Remember, it's a dance. We might have to come back to that. Let's do our calibration. Let's do our tone curve. That might be a bit too much. And let's do our histogram adjustments. All right, so I actually think we want to darken this a little bit, and then I'm going to brighten it up using a few filters. Okay, so the first thing that I notice is that the foreground rocks I don't really like. So I'm going to use my not focus light. I'm going to use my foreground balance. What that's going to do is create a sky mask and invert it, and then just a G&D here. But I actually really just want it for this. And I'm going to hide this foreground balance for now. And we're only going to use this one. And what we're going to actually do is darken those rocks a little bit, but we're going to bring up the whites in them. What that's going to do is just add some contrast a bit there. We can actually also decrease or increase the dehaze a little bit there. I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, so I really want to add some light to this middle ground here. So I think I'm actually going to do that with a painted light mask. This is going to create 3 different things in here, and that's actually going to work out pretty well for us because I kind of want to hit some of this water in different spots. That's looking good. Let's move this one over to here. I don't even know if we're going to have to change any settings here. Let's make this one a little bit bigger. Okay, let's duplicate this one and give ourselves one all the way back here for this last wave. And then maybe let's darken this one a little bit so it's not as much. And then check out to make sure these are pretty subtle. It looks like they are. This one could probably be a little bit brighter. Yeah, that's not looking bad. This is probably a little bit too big. And I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, something else I want to do is definitely warm up the sky a bit. So let's go to the sky balance mask. And then We're going to use the selected sky, so I don't need the G&D sky. We're going to reset the settings in here, and then I just want to warm up and add a little bit of red to that sky. Let's use the hue here. Yeah, I like the way that looks. Let's bring down the highlights. And let's actually bring up the saturation. Still a bit too blue. Let's warm it up some more. That's too much. Okay, so yeah, that's looking pretty good. That's probably too much. Once again, my eyes are probably tricking me a little bit. Let's bring it back down. Okay, yeah, I like the way that looks. All right, so one other thing I want to do is focus light. That's just going to create a big middle radial filter here. It's going to create some more light right in the middle. I'm not even going to change any settings on there, but I am going to darken the rest of the image. I think that's looking pretty good. Let's come in here. Let's do balance saturation. And I'm actually going to bring up the dehaze a little bit and the clarity down by quite a bit. Let's bring this up a little bit more. Let's bring up the exposure again. Okay, it's not perfect, but I definitely think from the start to where we're at now in terms of the colors we have in the sky, I'd probably spend a little bit more time on this. I think in terms of the final crop though, I would probably crop away maybe a little bit of that right side because there's not a lot going on here in the wave that I'm in love with. So let's just, I don't like that either. Let's play around a little bit here. Maybe a little bit of balance. I think we're suffocating a little bit too much on the left there. Let's maybe get rid of some of the rocks. I don't hate this. Something else you could play around with is actually getting rid of a lot of the rocks in the foreground and then also darkening the rocks more and having more of a 2x1 pano almost like this. I think that has a lot of justification as well. I think I really like this. We need to fix our horizon line. Let's use the angle. Make sure it's right. Yeah. And then if I was going to crop like this, see, this is a time the pre-crop would help because then I would know I'd want to darken those rocks a little bit more. I would just come back in here and create another mask, linear gradient, and scroll that. And then just bring down the shadows a little bit, bring down the exposure. We don't want to fully get rid of them, but we want that water to be exactly where our eyes go. And I think this is pretty close. I think maybe I would brighten the sky a little bit, but there's our before and after of that. I think that's looking pretty good. Okay, the next one is from Tim. Tim, thank you for submitting this. I love this image. Let's go up here and check our information. This is good to know. Good to know. Spot removal. Let's go into our healing. I don't see any necessary spots that are sticking out too much, so let's get out of that. Let's see, white balance fix. I think that's too much. I actually kind of really like the cold look. Tone curve. Oh, let's do our histogram adjustment first. Now let's brighten this up quite a bit. Yeah, that's looking nice. Now let's do our tone curve. And remember, you can come up here and use the amount. So more contrast, less contrast. I'm thinking less contrast. Okay, this is definitely an image I want to pre-crop because I know for a fact I'm very likely not going to use that side. I think this particular crop is really strong. Something along these lines. And I know that this is how I'm going to edit the image. Okay, so let's take a look at film look. So what the film look one is going to do is it's just going to adjust your tone curve in a filmic look very specifically. Like I said, I talk about this in the companion. If you need to address that and what it does right in here, you can always reference it. And I think that that actually looks really good for this image. I don't necessarily know if we need to do a ton more. I think that that was a nice look. You know, it's something we could choose a different color. So I could come down here and switch my hue primary for green, or I could switch my red primary. Also, I should include that I will have updates to this companion. So any extra tools or things that I learn over time or things that I add will continually be added to this. So not only will I release new downloaded versions, so if you do end up purchasing it, you will get those downloaded versions. It'll also be updated in the companion as well. So for example, if I sat here and moved these calibration sliders along and found a look that I really liked, I would add that to this preset pack, and you would get that if you end up buying it. And I really like the way this is looking. I don't think this needs a ton of stuff. I do think we should try to focus light on this tree though. So we're gonna use that. And I think that's really gonna help add a bit of light into the image in the spot that we want it. It doesn't have to be a lot. Let's do a lot, and then let's also come back in here and decrease our exposure. Yeah, I really like that way that looks. I think that one's done. I don't think we need to do much more. This is definitely an image where when you go to what's the mood, and you ask yourself that question in your first steps, that's really going to help you edit this image, because this is not an image that you might want to add a bunch of dynamics to, and it's not an image that really needs it because it was already moody to begin with. And we just kind of accentuated that, added a style to it, and I really like the way it turned out. Okay, this last image is from JB. This is of Bryce Canyon. Let's take a stab at it. Okay, let's check our data. All right. Shadow's looking good. Obviously that sun is blown out. That's totally okay and fully expected. Let's white balance and set our profile. Man, that already helped a lot. Let's do our calibration. Tone curve, we're probably not going to be able to add a ton of contrast, so let's do our histogram adjustments, which is what I was doing by nature of my workflow. And I'm starting to tell that maybe it's a little bit too orange. The one thing about color balancing these red hoodoos that I always have trouble with is they always just end up looking too red or orange during sunrise. So we have to be cognizant of that. And I think this is looking pretty good. Let's bring up the whites a little bit more. The first thing I want to fix is the sky. It's way too blue currently. So what I'm going to do first is actually come into my HSL and remove a little bit more blue from here. And it's looking a little green. I think I went a little too strong on this. That looks way better. Okay. All right. So I want to balance the sky. So let's do a sky balance mask. That is definitely too dark. So let's go into our selected sky. Undo that. I don't want that much dehaze. What's our GNT looking like? That's not too bad. I think this is looking okay. Maybe it could be a little bit brighter, but I think that's okay. So something I definitely want to do is focus light on the middle here, because we're really lacking some light here. So just a big, nice radial filter does a good job of adding some light there. Then I think I'm going to add a little bit of painted light in here. So let's move these around. I'm going to make them a little bit smaller, and they're just going to accentuate a little bit of the light there on some of those hoodoos that are already getting hit by light. So if I turn this off and on, you can see that little bit of light right there. It's already getting hit. Let's make sure our settings are good here. Yeah, I like the whites. Maybe even a little bit more exposure. Oh, maybe not too much. Whites is your friend with these because it'll really help add some contrast in there. I'm going to add this one down here. I'm going pretty quick through this, so it's a little fast and loose. And then let's add one right here, and let's bring that down a little bit. I think that's too bright. This one's probably also a little too bright. But to give you an idea, it's just adding a little touch of light to those sections. Okay, so the next thing I want to do, I don't have a setting for, so we're just going to go and create our own linear gradient, and then I'm going to just darken this corner just a little bit to balance it, so that the brightest part of the image that isn't the sun is not on the corner. Then we're going to come back in, and I'm going to look through these steps again. I think that it needs a little bit more brightness overall. And then coming back into the sky. Actually, what we could have done there, let me undo that. What we could have done there is actually done a foreground balance, which is going to be basically the opposite of the sky, and go in and actually use those instead, so that I don't have to go back in and do that. Yeah, that looks pretty good. But I do want to darken this again. Let's bring some, yeah. And I think that's looking good overall. Now let's do our post crop. and get our angle going here. It's a little bit on a hill, so I think that's looking pretty good. So maybe the saturation, so where it says balance saturation, is probably a little too much in this image. So let's bring it down by about 11 or 12. Yeah, I think that's good. Here's the start. Here's the end. I don't necessarily think I'm in love with the edit. I think if I spent and had more time on it, I could make it look a little bit better. But yeah, I think that's it. All right, so that's all I have for you today. I hope you learned something from this, regardless if you had any interest in the actual editing companion. And if you don't have interest, or you do have interest and you would just check it out and give me some feedback on what might be better or things that you would actually want in it that aren't already there, I would love that feedback as well. So anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, give it a like. And if you loved it, consider subscribing. And as always, there's a rainbow out there somewhere. We just got to go find it. And some mustaches. Later.